variable here stores the year 2022 in memory. We can read the information stored in this variable by using the variable name, including the $sign. In this example, we are using the echo keyword to tell PHP to output the value of the year variable. We can also change the value of the variables by reassigning them. Now, if we echo the year variable again, the value will be 2023. And we can also remove this variable from memory by using the unset function. But in most of the time, you won't need to worry about that. PHP will remove all variables from memory when they are no longer needed. Now let's look at what types of information we can store in a variable. In this example, we stored an integer inside the year variable. 2023 is an integer, which is a number without a decimal point. We can also store a float. A float is a number with a decimal point. And we can store a string as well, which is a sequence of characters. To assign a string value to the name variable, we use single quotes before and after the value. Or in other words, we delimited the string using single quotes. That's how we tell PHP that this thing is a string. And in addition to integers, floats, and strings, we can also add booleans. And booleans are a special data type that has only two possible values: true or false. Like a user can be an admin or not. The light can be on or off. You get the idea. Integers, floats, strings, and booleans are called scalar data types. You're going to use these a lot in any application that you're going to build. Now I'm going to show you a special data type that you can assign to variables. And this type or this data type is null. And null is simply, or it means that there is no value. The age variable here has a value of null, which means that this variable has no value. It's not 0, it's not false, but it has no value at all. There are two other important data types in PHP that you are going to use a lot. These are arrays and objects. An array is a collection of values. These values can be of the same type as our example here, or of a different type. And an array can also contain other arrays and can go as deeply nested as needed. And to define an array, we use two brackets and include the different array elements inside those brackets, separated by a comma. By default, the values in an array are keyed by incrementing integers starting with 0. For example, if we want to get the first element of the names array, we can do this by referencing the key 0. Using these two brackets here with a key in between tells PHP that we want to find the value of the element associated with this specific key. So to get the second name from the array, or to get the second element from the array, we will reference key 1. You get the idea now, I think. And now you can also define the keys associated with each element inside an array. In this example, we define an array that has 3 elements. The first element has the key name and the value Amelia. The second element has the key age and the value 27. And the third element has the key city and the value New York City. To get the value of any of the elements, you can reference the corresponding key. For example, we can get the name by referencing the name key, the age by referencing the age key, and the city by referencing the city key. Arrays that are keyed using custom keys, not the default incremental integers, are called associative arrays. Both regular arrays and associative arrays are very important, and you're going to use them a lot in your applications. Now, the other compound data type in PHP is the object data type. You can store values of more than one type inside an object, which is similar to an array. The difference between an object and array is that objects can be of different classes. You see, PHP has a standard generic class called std class. It also has different types of classes that you can use to create objects. And you can define your own classes as well. We will talk about objects later in this video, but for now you only need to know that an object is an instance of a specific class. Like I am an instance of the human class, and the sparrow outside my window is an instance of the bird class. Now back to our example. We can see that we are using PHP's std class to create an object on the fly. To create an instance of a class, we use the new keyword followed by the name of the class. After that, we may assign the object properties like we would do with any regular variable. We reference the property name on the object instance by using the object operator. It's a special operator that consists of the hyphen sign followed by the greater than sign. So here we set the name property to Amelia, the age property to 27, and the city property to New York City. We can access the values in these properties using the object operator as well. You can think of properties as variables that belong to a specific object. You cannot access these variables without referencing the object they belong to. Another thing you should know is that you can do several operations on variables depending on their types. For example, you can do regular mathematical operations on integer and float variables. Like here, for example, we are adding 1 to the value of the year variable, which is 2022. The next year variable here will now hold the value 2023. On string variables, you can concatenate, or in other words join, multiple strings. Like in this example, the name variable will hold the value of the first name variable, followed by a string of an empty space, followed by the value of the last name variable. The final value will be Amelia Pond. You can also check if a variable holds a value that's equal to a specific value or equal to another variable. Like in this example, we are checking if the year variable is equal to the birth year variable. Notice the double equal sign here. Using a single equal sign means we are assigning a value to a variable. But using double equal signs means we are comparing two different or completely two different values. Remember this difference, the difference between a single equal sign and two double equal signs. In this example, the isBaby variable will hold the Boolean value true, because the year variable holds a value that's equal to the value of the birth year variable. We can also use the not equal operator to check if two variables are not equal to each other. And we can also use the greater than and less than comparison operators. There are several operators that you can use in PHP to do mathematical operations, compare values, assign values, modify arrays, and much more. The moment you need to perform an operation in PHP, you will be able to find an operator for it. Don't try to remember all the operators because they are a lot, and you will remember the most common things that you use by time. Alright, let's move away from variables a little bit and look into functions. A function is a block of code that you can reuse multiple times in your application. Let's take a look at this function. We declare that a block of code is a function by using the function keyword, followed by the name of the function, then a parenthesis. Inside those parentheses, you can define any number of parameters that this function needs in order to do its job. Parameters are variables that can be used inside the function. In our example here, to calculate the age of a person, the function needs to know the birth year or the birth year of the person and the current year. Notice that the parameters are defined with a comma in between. After the parentheses, we add two curly braces. Code inside these curly braces is known as the function body. In this function, we want to calculate the age of a person. So inside the function body, we need to subtract the value of the birth year variable from the value of the current year variable, and then return the results for the function caller to use. To return the results from a function, we use the return keyword. And now if we want to use this function in our code, we can call it by name. After the name, we add parentheses, and inside these parentheses, we provide the arguments required by the function. This function requires the birth year and the current year, so we provide 1995 and 2022 as the function arguments. We can use this function multiple times and assign the results of each call to a different variable. Like here, we call the age method one time to calculate Amelia's age and another time to calculate Jack's age. The Amelia's age variable will now hold an integer value equals to 27, and this Jack's age variable will hold an integer value equals to 32. So looking at the function, we know that it requires two parameters of type integer and will return a value of type integer as well. But sometimes it's useful to tell PHP the expected type of each parameter and the expected return type of a function. That way, PHP will prevent us from accidentally passing the wrong data types or use the return value in the wrong context. And to define parameter types, we declare the type before the parameter name. So here the birth year parameter should be an integer and the current year parameter should be an integer. And to declare the return type, we add a colon after the parentheses followed by the type. In this case, it's an integer too. Now PHP will check the types of the input we provide and the type of the output returned, and will throw an error if there were any wrong types. Alright, as you can see, you can define your own functions in PHP. But the language itself comes with hundreds of built-in functions that you can use in your application. And I will leave a few links in the description down below to show you some interesting functions that you can use for array and string operations. When you write a program, you put together a series of statements that PHP must execute. Some of these statements are added to control the execution of one or more other statements. Take a look at this if statement. It evaluates the statement inside the parentheses, and if it evaluates to true, the code block inside the curly braces will be executed. Otherwise, the code will be ignored. So in this example, if the user age is over 18, the register method will be called, and the code will return true. Otherwise, none of the code inside the curly braces will be executed at all. There is also the else control structure, and this one encapsulates code that must be executed if the code inside the parentheses of the if statement evaluates to false. So here, if the user age is 18 or below, the code will return false. There is also the for each control structure, and this one takes an array and iterates over it, executing the code inside the curly braces. So in this particular example, the code will print hello for each given username inside the array. There are many other control structures that you can use in PHP, and you will discover those when you need them. Programming is telling the computer what to do by providing procedures that perform operations on the data. Object-oriented programming is about organizing these procedures into templates that can be defined and reused. These templates are called classes, and objects are instances of those classes. Almost all web applications operate on data around its users. So using object-oriented programming, we can define a user class that represents a user in the system. A class can contain different properties as well as different methods. To define a class, we may use the class keyword followed by the class name and then curly braces. Properties and functions inside these curly braces only belong to an instance of this class and cannot be used outside the scope of that instance. Here we define 3 public properties for the user class: name, birth year, and city. Properties can be public, private, or protected. Public properties can be accessed outside the class. Private and protected properties can only be used inside a function that belongs to the class. Public, private, and protected are called access modifiers. These are keywords that set the accessibility of class properties and methods. Now, we can also define the type of each property, and to do that, we may include the type declaration between the access modifier keywords and the property name. So here we have the name as a string, the birth year as an integer, and the city as a string. And as I briefly mentioned, you can also add functions inside classes. We usually refer to functions inside classes as methods. So here we add an age method that accepts a current year parameter. Notice that we use the public access modifier before the function keyword to say that this method can be called from outside the object. Also notice that inside the method, we were able to access the birth year class property by using the this variable. This is a special variable that refers to the current instance of the class. We use this followed by the object operator and then the property name. To create an instance of this class, we may use the new keyword followed by the class name. And now the Amelia variable holds an instance of the user class. We can set the value of any of the public properties of this object using the object operator like we did before. And we can also call the age method using the same operator. Here the age variable will hold the integer value 27, which is calculated inside the age method. Now for some objects, creating the object without initializing any properties makes sense. But for the majority of objects, you need to initialize some properties while creating the instance. For example, this user class we have here, it doesn't make sense to create a user object without any details. The object will be useless until you set the needed properties. And in that case, we may add a construct method which will be called while PHP is creating the object. In this construct method, and notice the 2 underscores at the beginning, we require 3 parameters: the name, the birth year, and the city. Inside the constructor body, we set the class properties from the values provided to the constructor. Now, when we create an object of class user, we must provide the required constructor parameters. Otherwise, PHP will return an error. Constructors guard our objects by making sure the required properties are provided while initializing the object. We can also define class properties using this shortcut. This is called constructor property promotion. By including access modifiers before the constructor parameter, PHP will register this parameter as a class property and fill it for us. That way we don't have to declare the class properties or assign their values inside the constructor body. PHP will do this for us. It will do it automatically. Notice that even though the constructor method doesn't have a body, we still need to provide the curly braces. This is very important. Don't forget the curly braces. Alright, there is something very important about classes in PHP that you should know about. And that is that classes has the ability to inherit properties and methods from one class into another. Take a look at this manager class. Notice the extends user part here. This is us telling PHP that the manager class is a subclass of the user class. Or in other words, we are telling PHP that managers are users. A manager object has a name, birth year, and a city. A manager object also has access to the age method that's defined inside the user class. To create a manager object, you will be required to pass all constructor parameters of the user class, because the manager class extends the user class. And once the object is created, you may use the age method to find the age of the manager. PHP will use the age method definition from the user class. Inside the manager class, you can override any of the methods that are defined in the user class, including the constructor itself. You can also add your own methods that will be available only to objects of type manager, but not objects of type user. You can also define class properties that will only be available in the manager object. Class inheritance is a very important aspect of object-oriented programming, as it provides code reusability, which saves us a lot of time while writing new functionalities in large applications, and also saves us time while making changes, as we only need to change the parent class. Another language feature that's related to object-oriented programming in PHP is object interfaces. These are similar to classes, but they don't have any code of their own. They just allow us to specify which methods a class must implement. Consider these two classes that handle processing payments. One class handles processing credit card payments, while the other one handles processing PayPal payments. These two classes have completely different methods, different requirements, and different business logic. All they have in common is that they both have a process method that is called when the application needs to collect the payment. And to ensure that each payment processor in our project implements a process method, we may create an interface that enforces it. To create an interface, we may use the interface keyword followed by the name of the interface and then curly braces. Inside the curly braces, we can define any number of methods using the regular declaration syntax. However, interface methods don't have a body. You can define parameters with their types as well as return types, but you cannot define a body. An interface is just a contract that says any class that implements this interface must have a method that looks like this. And now inside our classes, we may implement the payment processor interface by using the implements keyword. By doing this, PHP will error if we don't add an implementation for the process method in any of these classes. And now we can type in this interface in another function or class property and have the confidence that whatever object we receive will have a process method. Take a look at this pay method. It expects an integer amount as the first parameter and a value of type payment processor as the second parameter. This function will accept any object that implements the payment processor interface. And inside the function body, we can call the process method because we are sure that the value provided will have this method implemented. I am guessing by now you are starting to understand the importance of object-oriented programming, or OOP for short, especially when building large applications. PHP has all the tools needed to implement OOP in your application, which makes it a good fit for building large enterprise applications as well as small applications. Now let's move to another topic in this video, which is enumerations, or enums for short, which is a data type that has a fixed number of possible values. Think of an order status in an e-commerce system. The status can be pending, shipped, or delivered. Enums allow us to represent these values in a uniform, readable way. And to define an enum in PHP, we may use the enum keyword followed by the enum name, followed by the enum values data type, and then curly braces. Inside the curly braces, you can define the cases that enum supports using the case keyword. Each case must have a unique value that is of the same type as the type of the enum. Enums allow us to make our code more readable. So now if we want to reference the pending status anywhere in our code, we may use the enum name, followed by 2 colons and then the case name. This is much more readable than using the integer representation of the status. If you want to compare an enum case to the integer value, you will need to cast the integer value to an enum, or use the enum value for the comparison instead. To cast the integer to an enum, you may use the from method. And to use the value of the enum case, you may use the value property. Both these cases will evaluate to true. You can also add methods to an enum like you would do in a typical class. Here we added a progress method that returns the order progress depending on its status. The progress will be 30% if the order is pending, 70% when shipped, and 100% when delivered. And now we can call the progress method on an enum to get the current order progress. We can also get a list of all the possible enum values using the cases method. This method will return an array of enums, each with 2 properties, one for the name and the other for the integer value. We can use this method to display the list of possible values in a user interface, for example. Now that we defined an enum, we can use this enum type in any of our function parameters or class property declarations. In this example, the update status function requires a value of type order status as the second parameter. Now, when calling this function, you may pass any of the enum cases to the second parameter. If you pass anything else, PHP will error because the method expects an enum. And now that you are familiar with the syntax of PHP language, how to use object-oriented